Let's see here. I'm gonna try to invite him up. We already
I'll
got
take
more.
my mask off. Hold on.
Hey, me and Good Guy are in them, so.
You got. Yeah. Well, is that actually you with that incredibly luscious beard?
Yeah, bro.
All right. Let's invite to speak here.
His Filipino work assistant did that for him.
Yeah, probably. All right. I gotta make one of you guys co-host. Let's see here. George, can you hear me?
Yeah. Magoo, I missed you on the first one.
Yeah, I told you I was busy. I was
Oh,
slaving
you're
away
busy.
on my
You're way
desk
too busy.
job.
You're not too busy to talk shit,
No,
but you're
definitely
actually
All
too
not.
right,
busy to
let's
actually
fucking
talk.
go.
Piccolo, shut up. You're getting removed from stage.
So tell me, help me understand your point. Why am I one of the worst macro analysts? Go ahead and
Well,
articulate your point, and let's be specific here,
all
so
right.
you can teach me what I don't know about macro. Let's start there,
Roger that, and then we can go deeper into everything.
and then you can tell me why.
Were you gonna let me
Or
tell you? You're
what the
gonna shut up.
mentality
What are you
is
gonna?
of some fucking douchebag that has to hide behind some sort of symbol and doesn't have the balls to come out and tell people who he actually is and has nothing better to do at this time than to sit here and bully people on Twitter and social media because your life is too fucking pathetic otherwise.
All right.
But we'll start with the macro.
All right, guys,
Okay.
guys, let's. I'm gonna play. I'm gonna play debate moderator here now that Magoo's here. Instead of being a cuck and George here, you're actually here to respond to things yourself. But let's at least try to make this more of a discussion than
Yeah,
anything.
George. Just point to where the bad man touched you, but I'll go into the NIM thing first. Then we can go into the macro catastrophe stuff. Um, so one, let me paint a story or a picture. One that you should probably know pretty well yourself because you being an expat, being in certain areas of the world yourself. Personally, I know people that have actually been kidnapped and killed for who they are or their wealth in certain areas of the world because they were dumb enough to actually present themselves as being wealthy in very dangerous parts of the world. And so I know people that have been actually kidnapped because I also live in Latin America, George. And so I've seen people and I've seen things that if certain individuals figure out that you have money and you're not riding in a massive entourage at all times, there is very easy points of attack and attack vectors to take people out, right? And especially in the Bitcoin community, being in a self-sovereign kind of mindset, everybody knows that a lot of Bitcoiners, one, don't trust banks, they don't trust fiat currencies. And so at the end of the day, most Bitcoiners are going to probably be holding their Bitcoin or their crypto or whatever you want to call it in a self-custodian manner where they're in control of it and that they can be extorted. Like I've literally seen people be extorted for millions of dollars.
That's the excuse you use for hiding your identity.
No, that's not my
You've
only
got to be
excuse.
kidding me right
George,
now.
okay,
You've
guys,
got to be
stop.
kidding me.
George, you can't call that an excuse. It's not an excuse. Like you said
What
earlier
is it?
in your spaces earlier, like I've had people threaten to attack me too. I've received violent threats, and wanting to keep some degree of disconnection from your face, your legal identity, is a perfectly rational thing. And
Right, because
a
it has
distinction,
nothing
but
to
hold,
do
hold
with
on,
being
George.
anonymous online,
Distinction,
so
a
you can take
distinction I
ass out of
want,
yourself and
George.
bully
George,
people with
there is an
no
important
accountability whatsoever.
distinction
That has
to
nothing
make.
to do with it. Give me a fucking
George,
break.
there is an important distinction to make between anonymity and pseudonymity. Anonymity is no one ever knows who you are. There is no consistency or connection between different things you say or actions you take. Pseudonymity, all of those things are still tied to an identity. It might not be my legal identity, it might not be my face, but this is a consistent identity. And if I act in a way that is malicious or foolish or makes me look stupid consistently enough, that's still an identity that is being tarnished. I can't just come back with this voice that is widely known and
Yeah,
make
so
a
like,
new fake
So,
identity.
so let me
My
understand. So your
reputation
rationale,
is still tied to me.
so your rationale, excuse me, for hiding behind a cartoon character is that you live in Latin America and you're too scared that you're going to be kidnapped. Is that correct?
no, there's multiple things. That's one thing because I've actually personally seen that, and for you to kind of make a mockery of that, that's kind of disgusting,
Well,
George.
let's not
Because
forget that I've lived in Medellin, Colombia,
yeah,
since
George,
2014, and if you actually look at the kidnapping statistics, you're more likely to be kidnapped in Canada and in Belgium than you are
That was
in
right after all
Colombia.
those lawsuits started, right, George?
George, I don't live in Medellin, Colombia. Like one and two, to make say that's an excuse. That's very interesting because that's actually a really real world use case.
But it's
But
a cop out, man. Let's just it's a cop out. Let's just be honest for a moment here.
can
Dude, why
we?
does
Can
it
I?
You
fucking
hide
matter?
behind a cartoon character.
Bro, George, can you like? You actually want? Do you want to actually like have a discussion, or do you just want to yell like a deranged lunatic? Like yes or no? Like we can have a discussion, but like if you're just gonna go off the rails and just yell, like you can do that on YouTube. Um,
It's
but
privacy. That's it. It's the
but
bottom
but at
line.
the
It's
end of the
privacy.
day, like Shinobi was saying, like it's not like I could tarnish this reputation as this cartoon character, and it one like obviously if you're trying to monetize, that's a different thing, and it's actually a lot more detrimental to your reputation. It's another thing if you're not trying to monetize whatever your pseudonymity or your identity. But at the end of the day, there's also compliance and regulatory things, George. Like I don't know where your history in terms of finances and where you've actually worked or what you've done, but like in the finance world, depending on who you work for, there's things you can and you cannot do with your actual identity, or else regulators or compliance officers and things will actually it's be detrimental. You won't be able to do the things that you do when you put your actual identity on your internet profile, whatever you want to call it. And so there's that reason as well. Like so there's multitudes of reasons why I personally think that like that you don't need to have your quote unquote your real face on your profile.
So
It's privacy.
if you
It's
use
privacy. It's
your
the bottom
real
line.
identity, if you use let me get this straight. If you use your real identity, that would not change the way you behave online at all.
No, probably not. I don't.
Oh, come
I'll
on.
agree. Like,
Come
I
on. Everyone
say
on this thing knows you're lying through your teeth.
no. Like George, that's what you don't understand. Some people who have grown up on the internet are not afraid to actually voice what they really think. They don't have. They're not moderating themselves. Like, and like, this is no disrespect, but like, if I was trying to monetize like my online presence, then I would be a lot more careful with what I say because if I had a YouTube channel or if I had all these things, then I would 100% be monitoring what I'm saying because then that would affect how I can monetize my business. But the fact that I don't and I have no inkling or caring in the future of ever monetizing or worrying about being canceled, it really isn't important to me about if someone online thinks that I'm an asshole or if I say something that's not correct.
Then let's
Because
go into why do it. Why do it then?
so
Why
why
be an
do it?
asshole online? Why?
So this is so there's have you ever heard the analogy of in the old feudalist days that the Joker was the only person that was able to actually speak the truth, George?
No,
Because
but what I have heard and what I've experienced is the little kid in grade school that has such low self-esteem that the only thing that they can do is pick on others around them.
Why
I
are you
think that
picking
you
on
might
grade
fall into that
schoolers, Magoo?
category.
George, is it fair to say that it's about retaliation? Is that what it's about? Like you just want to know like what his name is so that you can go like report him to his boss or something? Is that what it's about?
Is this like when you
You've
pick
got to
on
be kidding me
kids?
right now.
Is this like a
You've got to
talent
be kidding
agency
me.
thing that's picking on kids, or how's that
No,
work?
no. It's a legitimate criticism, dude. Because it's like you're not the
So
only
you
one who's been
actually think
on this
you
high horse.
actually think that I want to know his identity so I can somehow get him fired as retribution?
I
Well,
think
I mean,
Why does it matter?
what's the other reason? Like, what does it matter? Like, okay, he comes
He's
out, he
worried
reveals
about the
his identity.
sexual
Like,
deviance, George.
what's
Come
the
on.
difference? What's
so.
the difference
So
between?
so
Can we
George,
just why George
let
is
me.
wrong?
Because I'm trying.
Okay, guys, 20 people screaming over each other does not a coherent conversation make.
Let me let me let me add a little context there, George, so people understand a little bit more. So one, like what I do, like particularly like what this quote unquote profile is meant to do. It's meant to inform rather uneducated people about the inner workings of finance and the inner workings of Bitcoin and crypto and the industry in general, and even macro, and just call out bullshit as I see it, right? And there's a lot of bullshit that's out there that I think you could agree with. But ultimately, it's at the end of the day, it's about making people aware of things that have happened or are happening, right? And if I had my own face on quote unquote this profile, I wouldn't be able to add the value that I add by the things that I say, because there'd be these dangers that are associated with putting my face on it. It's not that I'm scared of somebody or that I'm saying, hey, look, like this doesn't make sense or this is bullshit. It's that I wouldn't be able to add the value that I add because it would stop my ability to do it, essentially.
So I could add more value if I hid behind a cartoon character and
No,
just
not
made fun of everyone
no,
and
not
personally
really, Joe.
attacked people.
Well,
I'd
Joe,
add more value there.
if we want to talk about your shtick, like, and this is like not like any disrespect, this is just like it's business. Like your online personality is based on one being a successful entrepreneur and being a successful kind of, not a life coach, but like a
You
business
are
coach.
absolutely clueless.
No, but George, it
This
is.
just shows everyone listening right now how
No,
clueless you are. If you
George,
think
No,
I've
George,
got
we
some
know.
sort of online persona,
We
George,
agree
that's
with
what
him,
you
though, George.
are.
fabricated,
How are you
you're
denying
absolutely
this?
dreaming. You're
How are
dreaming.
you denying
We
this?
You're just
agree with
lying
him.
to yourself.
George, your whole online shtick is putting videos out there and based off of you as a business person talking to all these other prominent business people. How can you possibly deny that's what your shtick is? And I'm not saying it's a bad shtick. I'm just saying it is what it is. Like, you are monetizing your appearance, you're monetizing your persona in getting people on your podcast. It's all monetizing personas. Your persona, you meeting with, let's say, Elf, or meeting with Lynn Alden, or meeting with any other macro person or anyone else that someone wants to listen to. It's all predicated on, hey, George knows what he's talking about. George knows things, and he knows these people that know other things. So let's listen to these people have a dynamic conversation.
So I have to fake people into believing that I'm something I am not.
No, you don't have
My
George.
podcast.
No,
You
George.
use the
It's not
wrong
about
word.
faking.
Why
I'm
would you
not. I'm not
fake?
saying
Yeah,
that
that's
you don't.
not
You have to
correct.
fake it. George, it could be completely true. Like, I'm not saying it has to be fake.
Exactly.
It could be real. But
But you think this is premeditated?
no, it's not premeditated. It's marketing
He's telling you
101,
how it
George.
is.
You
He's
know
telling
this,
you what's
George.
going
Don't
on.
place George.
That's what's happening.
No, but
George.
here's the problem I have with this. There is one reason and one priority for me creating content. I don't have to do any of this. I don't have to do a YouTube channel. I don't have to do a podcast. I don't have to do Twitter. Nothing. The main motivation that I have is to explore ideas and talk about macro with interesting people.
Then why do you monetize it, George? That's exactly what I do, but I don't monetize it.
Let me go ahead and go into that, because if I monetize it, then that gives me the ability to create more and better content. If I wanted to, let's go down this path. If I really wanted to monetize, what would I do? Let me just kind of go through this, and I'm sure you already know this. But what you do is you'd focus on one narrative, like buy Bitcoin. And then you just harp on that over and over and over and over and over. And every single video or every single tweet, every single podcast would be why you should buy Bitcoin. So what you're going to do with that is you're going to amass a following very, very quickly, because people don't want to hear your opinion. They want to hear their opinion coming out of your mouth. So if you just repeat what they want to hear over and over and over, that's how you build an audience fast, and that's how you really monetize.
So George,
So
that's how
what you'll notice, Mr. Magoo, is I actually do the opposite of that.
So George,
I explore any and all ideas. I push back against my own ideas.
So George, you're touching on something here. So what you just described is how you build an audience of idiots, and you are right. There's tons of people out there that build audiences of idiots that will just want a narrative. But the clientele that actually have money are a little bit smarter than that, and they actually want to hear dissenting views and they want to hear dialogue. And
That's
those,
absolutely incorrect.
it's incorrect that
If you want to monetize, the best strategy is to do exactly what I said. Pick a narrative, whether it's gold, silver, Bitcoin, you name it, and just harp on that same narrative with every single video, every single tweet, every single podcast. That's how you amass an audience, and
you're saying
that's how
everybody's
you
stupid.
maximize
Talking
your
about
no,
marketing
monetization.
to two different
George. The
demographics.
reason why you can't do that, or it's very hard to penetrate that, I'll call it the dumb marketing play, is because that market is littered with absolute morons. Like your competition is endless. Whether it's gold,
Let
whether
me,
it's Bitcoin. George, can you let me finish one
but you just
thought?
admitted that you have no.
Let me finish one thought, George, before you go off on your tangential fucking trolls. All right, like what I'm saying is that landscape. It's you're going to be a small fish in a very big pond. There's a lot of people out there already shilling Bitcoin, crypto, gold, whatever it is, right? Bull only, bear only, whatever it is. That landscape is completely saturated, and in
Yeah,
terms of the
and you're not
market.
doing that.
No, I'm not selling anything, George. Like if you
Well, then,
actually,
if you're not selling anything, if you haven't monetized anything, then how do you know what the best practice is? How are you an expert on something you know nothing about?
it's obvious, George. Like at the end
Because
of
he's
the
been
day,
right.
at the end of the day, so when you have a saturated market and you're trying to fit in, what you need to do is you create a niche market. And it's the same thing. It's why like Jeff Snyder, it's why Stephen Van Meter, why those people aren't marketing to complete brain dead individuals. They're marketing to people that have a little bit higher IQ, have a little bit more money in their pocketbook, that actually care about dissenting views in conversations and looking at things in different ways. And you create yourself a little nook out of the giant pool of people that are interested in anything finance or anything related to making money, businesses, entrepreneurs. And there's different avenues that you can take to monetize. Because if I have an audience, George, of 5 million people that are dead stupid and dead poor, you're going to have, even how big your audience is, you're going to have a rather hard time monetizing. But if you have a small group of hardcore believers in yourself that are willing to pay hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for courses or for conference tickets or for whatever, you're going to be able to make even more money than having a bunch of poor followers, like at the end of the day. So it all comes down to finding your niche and then finding the best way to monetize your niche. And it's always good to have your niche having be people that have money, that have a lot more money, right? And so
So,
that's how you
not
monetize.
only do you have an unjustifiable arrogance when it comes to macro, you have the exact same thing when it comes to YouTube. How many YouTube channels do you have?
Zero, because I don't need to monetize.
Oh, but you're giving me a lecture on how to run a YouTube channel and grow an
I'm not
audience.
George. I'm
No,
not
he's
telling
just
you how
telling
to
you how
run
it is.
anything, George. I'm not telling
Take
you
it
how to
easy,
run your
buddy.
shit. I'm just telling
But
you.
did you just hear the last 5 minutes of your monologue
No, I'm just
Okay.
on
telling you.
how to grow an
Oh my
expert
God.
from the
This is a
standpoint of being a
conversation.
social media influencer? I
Relax.
mean, listen to what you're
Jesus.
saying.
Did you just hook on to like one word and then think about that for the next 4 minutes?
But George, again,
This is the problem, George. Like honestly, George, I think you came in here with like a listen to retaliate, not a listen to have a conversation. But that's fine. We
Oh,
can
I'm the one.
have
No, no,
this.
no, no. Now this is really going off the deep end. Now, so you're telling me that I'm the one that doesn't want to engage, and
It
just
doesn't seem like it,
in
George. You
dialogue.
came in here and just started screaming about non like just retarded things.
It's just
Okay,
his
so
opinion,
let's go
man.
back. Let's
Just like a
rewind.
woman.
Why don't you tell me exactly why I am the worst macro analyst out there? Why don't you tell me specifically what I get wrong?
So what you get wrong, this is even more meta than you're going to be able to handle. The things that you spout in terms of macro are not your own ideas. Like when you have people on, and this is totally fine when you have Elf or Lynn or any other macro person on, and they tell you their macro lens. right? Whatever that is, whatever their biases are, whatever they think is to be true, and it may be true, and they might be right. But everything that when you're talking about it, it's literally a mishmash of everyone's thesis, and it lacks a direction to the point where when I listen to you, this is just my own personal opinion. Anyone can have their own opinion. When I listen to you, George, I can see, or at least hear, all the different lenses of all the guests that you're having on, and you're trying to massage all of them into this one coherent macro thesis. And it's fumbly and very bulky and clumsy, because it's very easy to pick out. It's like, well, I can see where he's getting this idea, I can see
No,
where he's getting this idea.
what do I get wrong?
What
What
do you
is
get?
fundamentally
You
inaccurate about
you,
my
you don't
analysis?
if you listen, you don't have a macro thesis. Your macro thesis is everyone
Ah,
else's macro thesis. And
right.
like,
So
if
I
you,
just aggregate what is out there, and I just regurgitate it as though it's my own, as
well,
though it's
no,
my
it's
own
not.
ideas, and I have no original ideas whatsoever. I have no original framework. It's just other people out there that I just steal their framework and just reiterate it on a whiteboard video.
Well, if you want to put it like that, but I didn't want to use the word steal. But it's not that you're stealing, because it's not like this is IP. Like, anyone can have an idea or a macro thesis, and you can look at that and be like, you know what, they actually make a little bit sense here. Let me take this into my cognitive kind of framework here and try to put it into something else. But what I'm telling you is that when you're doing it, or at least this is what when I listen to you, whether it's a whiteboard or whatever you're talking about, it lacks direction. This is just my personal opinion. When I listen to you, you have a lot of contradictory things when you're talking about it, because you'll take things like what Jeff Schneider says, which is at complete odds what Lynn Alden says, and you try to morph them together, and it's like, you just feel it and hear it. Like, this doesn't pass the sniff test, because you have such at odd macro thesis and macro ideas. Like, just to put it in a very stupid sense, like, you'll have like a Keynesian idea versus an Austrian idea.
Well,
And
what's the Keynesian idea I have? Let's be specific here.
so
You're overgeneralizing. Be
so
specific,
so
Magoo.
the
Be
Keynesian
specific.
stuff.
What's the Keynesian idea I have that you disagree with?
Well, I'll talk about the Keynesian ideas that you talk about. I don't know if they're your ideas, but
But
so
so you don't know that they're my ideas. So then how am I inaccurate? You said I'm the worst macro analyst
no, so
of all time. But it gets what you're doing
These
is you're
ideas
not
have been
being
around for years.
specific. Be
so
specific.
So this is the
What is
thing,
it that I
though.
get
What you're
wrong?
saying is you're putting your framework together. Like, you might say things, George, that are right. Like, certain things, like, okay, yeah, what George is saying here is
But
right.
okay, certain things. What do I say that's fundamentally wrong?
You want me to pull up your entire YouTube catalog? At the end
No,
of the
but
day,
I would assume that if I get so many things wrong and I'm the worst macro
He's
analyst, that
basically saying
you
just
could
pick a
go
fucking
down the
lane.
list of the things that I get fundamentally wrong. Why is
you
this so hard to answer?
because you don't
It's a dumb
actually have a
question.
macro thesis, George. You literally just have people on your show and regurgitate what they say, and I'm left sitting there being like, there's nothing new here, and I can't, like, and it just lacks any direction. Like, there's
You
like,
realize, but what's funny here is you realize I haven't done an actual interview on the George Gammon channel in probably 4 or 5 months. You realize I stopped doing that.
what, an interview? Yeah, but it's not that you're having interviews with these people. You're
You just said
listening.
that.
No, you
Oh
did.
my god, what the hell is
Maybe,
going on here? You guys
but
like 15? Jesus Christ.
at the end of the day, you were taking people's thesis. Didn't you just have an interview with Elf, like,
That is
today?
where I invited it onto a live stream. You're talking about interviews from the
Oh,
George Gammon
oh
channel, The
my,
Rebel Capitalist.
oh my God! Interview, live stream, like, this is semantics. You have conversations with people, whether it's a live stream, an interview. You're at
Me
Tito
trolling
Taco
you.
Bell. You're anywhere. It doesn't matter. When you're talking about your macro thesis, like, you're getting a lot of this stuff from what Elf will say, and what Lynn will say, or what Schneider will say, or whoever that you've been talking to, and you're getting these ideas, and they're coming through. Like, and some of their ideas are right, George. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying everything's wrong, because some of them are right and some of them are wrong. But a lot of them lack conviction, because you're playing both sides of the fence of all these macro analysts, and coming up with basically what they've said. And there's no George Gammon thesis. It's just like, oh, George is writing Lynn's thesis on a board that has a little bit of this involved and has a little bit of this. And it's like, what's George's actual thesis here?
Like, can we get
like
George's
Peter McCuck,
thesis? I would love to hear George's current thesis on what's going on, because it's a kind of an interesting market.
Yeah, let's give a specific example here. That one of the theses that I wrote on the hypotheses that I've been exploring lately is the fact that sound money isn't a panacea. So who did I steal that from, Mr. Magoo?
Sound money's not a panacea. Everybody.
No.
Welcome
okay,
to
let me
welcome
be
to
more
Bit-
specific.
welcome
my
to
fault,
Bitcoin. Welcome to Bitcoin conversations for circa 2011. So this is like, if you actually listen to real Bitcoiners that aren't people that are just shouting $10 million a coin is going to take over the world, and you actually listen to people that have been in the space, some of these topics about sound money isn't going to solve the world's problems, are things that we've been talking about since 2011.
People like Breedlove. Would you suggest I talk to Breedlove?
I would not suggest you talk to
What?
Breedlove at any.
You're talking to the wrong guys, George.
You're
Come
talking
on.
to the wrong guys, George. You're talking to the YouTube talking head personalities of what.
How about Lynn Alden?
Would you talk about Lynn Alden? Yeah, I would talk to Lynn Alden. You have to take what she says with a grain of salt, because she runs a portfolio basically that is just a gambit of different assets. But you can talk to her. But I think she's not going to say that Bitcoin's going to solve the world's problems. At least I hope she won't.
She doesn't run a portfolio, Magoo. She just manages her own money, and then she has her subscription
Yeah, her
products.
analyst.
She's a macro.
I mean, I don't think you really have watched enough of my videos to understand what you're talking about.
I've watched
let's just go back to the
probably
sound money detail.
20 of them. 20 of them.
20 of my whiteboard out of the
Screw the
3,000 videos I've done, you've watched
Screw 'em.
20,
Prove it to
and
us
now
Georgie
you
boy. Prove it to
believe
us
that you
now.
understand everything about my framework.
Hey, George, you were talking about people hiding information, not being forward-facing, things of that nature earlier. I was just wondering if you could speak to all these lawsuits related to this talent agency from 2012 and previous, and
You're talking, you're talking about the fight that I got into with the Attorney General in the state of Connecticut, which actually is a great story, and I've told that many times.
I'd love to hear it from your perspective.
Well, now's not
of course.
the place for the story, but I've told it many times in the conferences.
Well, no, I think
where I
we
do
were
public
just trying
speaking,
to not hide information, right? Not be anonymous and be forward-facing. And I think in a conversation,
we're focusing on macro. We're focusing on
good guy. We're focusing on macro. If you want to hear about that, you can pay the conference tickets and you can go. You can learn about it then. But let's focus on macro here. Continue. All right, George. Let's hear your macro framework for how sound money is a panacea, even though or is not a panacea.
Gotta hit the mic button, George.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, you're on mute.
Oh, jeez.
Hey, Mike, can you stop being a retard and explain why you have one black thumb and one yellow thumb? Fucking moron.
I was hoping you'd notice that. I was waiting for you to call that out. Thanks, Shinobi.
Oh, George, by the way, if you do want to schedule a live stream with me, you can DM Mike Alfred here directly. He's my personal assistant.
Yeah.
That's
George,
why you never attended the meeting.
I'm happy to help, George, anyway.
Okay, so do you want to continue on the macro path, or do you want to continue down maybe trying to understand why you get your kicks off of being an asshole online?
Let's go with the macro, and then let's go with the kicks after. Because I really want to touch both. Let's stick macro, then we can go to the shits and giggles.
Okay, so the reason why sound money doesn't always lead to small government, it's not an inevitability, is because if you look at the current state of affairs, the United States, for a long period of time, the federal government has been receiving about 18% of GDP in tax revenue, and therefore they spend it. You look at state and local, now all of a sudden you're up at 25, you're up at 30%. So I think any of us on this call right now would say that that is big government. If you're using that metric, that's definitely what I would define as big government. But that's
Mike, are
just
you having a
through
stroke?
tax revenue.
So do you think, or George rather, do you think that the government would be able to fund its current liabilities without the ability to print money?
Well, this is a debate I think we should have, and this is very interesting. Because it is true that if you go back to the 1800s, and if you move forward, assuming that we go onto a Bitcoin standard, that there would be serious differences. I mean, not having to store your wealth in a bank and being able to store it in your back pocket, that's definitely going to change the incentive structure.
Well, it's not just about storing it in your back pocket.
But that assumes again that you're living in a society that doesn't favor large government and doesn't vote for more and more taxation. Because I do believe that even if you could hold 100% of your wealth in your back pocket, that the government would still tax you. Now, it might be in the form of a sales tax. It might be still in the form of an income tax. I don't know.
So George,
if we're on a Bitcoin standard, the government wouldn't try to collect taxes. I don't see that as being a reality.
So that's not so George. Like this maybe this goes back to listening to the wrong Bitcoiners, because a lot of Bitcoiners, maybe if they're like the crazy super libertarian or anocap who think that that's a reality, but if you talk to some of the OG Bitcoiners and a lot of the people that actually use their head, it's not about not paying tax, George. It's about actually having representation when you're getting taxed. For example, inflation is a tax that people actually don't vote on. And politicians just use that as a crutch so they don't actually have to campaign on raising taxes because they know they would never be able to do it. So this puts the power back in the hands of people.
You've got to be kidding me right now.
What, you don't think, what did you say, what did I say that you don't agree with?
Mr. Magoo, this, with all due respect, my friend, this is just basic stuff.
But what
And to think that I don't get
Does the
this,
average person
what did I
understand
just
tax
say, George, that you don't agree with?
I'm not saying that I don't agree with it. I'm saying that it's just super basic stuff. To sit there and imply that I don't understand that inflation is some sort of stealth tax. I mean, come on,
George,
you got to bring your A game here, my friend. That's
George,
just
All right, Magoo, shut up. George, here's an observation worth noting when looking at things from the other side. Back in like 2014, the estimates for the equivalent GDP value of black and gray markets worldwide was something like 2/3 of US GDP year over year. And that was growing massively at the time. And so, if you turn the only viable tax mechanism into sales tax, that has really interesting complications when looking at decades-long trends in how much economic activity is actually conducted in black and gray markets.
Okay, but my point is, if you have a society that favors more and more taxation and larger government and free stuff, that's what you're going to get.
So George,
regardless of whether or not you've got sound money.
But we don't, George. We have 50% of the population that favors that, and 50% that don't.
So this is George.
It's a
The only
democracy, so you're gonna get that. And that's why we
Anecdotally,
have
George,
right now-
I live in a state in the U.S. where cannabis is legal and available in a legal shop. You pay your taxes on it. That's not where I buy my weed, George. And that's not going to be where I buy my weed. And more things are slipping into that type of informal economy.
So George, it's not.
So you're saying the black market, the informal economy, is going to prevent government spending?
No,
it's going to make it harder to generate revenue from sales taxes, because I can just go buy my eggs from the dude who has a bunch of chickens, and he's not paying taxes. I'm not paying taxes. You have no way to enforce taxes like that. And the more fucked up the economy gets, supply chains push people towards local sourcing of things, local production of things, the more those types of informal economic actions are going to be making up more and more of people's economic transactions.
Let's look at how the government, in its current state, has been able to get taxation to the point of where they've gotten it, and also looking at that inflation is taxation as well. At the end of the day, you say that like a society that wants to have more taxes and wants to have more free things, but the reality is that the majority of people actually don't want more taxes, and the government is constrained with raising taxes because they know they can't campaign on it, And so what they do is the stealth tax with inflation. So the majority, you're
But
wrong
right
there.
now,
The majority of people
just in
don't
tax
want it.
collection, I'm not talking about inflation, just with tax collection that people have voted for, government spending as a percentage of GDP is 50%.
Yes, George, but you're ignoring the fact and the reality of the growth of informal and black market economies,
Okay,
representing both a source of income as well as a mechanism in place where money is spent. So
okay,
it actually, the further that grows and the further you have a thing like Bitcoin that can facilitate the growth of that without regulatory choke points, the more you keep driving up the cost of actually enforcing taxation. Because once you remove inflation, it's really income and spending.
Like let's look at let's just look back in history.
But let me understand your view here. Let me understand your worldview. You
So
think
he's
that
gonna
in the
repeat it to me
future,
now.
but I just want to understand it. Is that okay? So
Yeah, go ahead.
your base case is that we go to a Bitcoin standard, and when we're on a Bitcoin standard, the government, obviously it's illegal not to pay tax, but you think that so many people are going to live without that, outside of that system. There's going to be a black market that springs up, and that black market, although it's illegal and people are not paying taxes illegally, that they're going to gravitate to that to such a degree that it's going to shrink down government to a very limited size, regardless of how people are voting. Is that your base case?
No, I'm saying that there is a very significant mechanism that could actually push back in that direction, George.
So
Because
let's
you really need to get a pulse of reality and the ground to get a grasp of how many things you can just get
so George,
in the black market, like stolen goods, technology, like people selling fucking food and shit. Things that they buy, they know shortages are coming for, and then selling informally. All of this is untaxed. That's untaxed income for the seller, and that's something you can't slap a sales tax on for the buyer.
Right, and we still have big government.
But George, what you're missing is that like reality goes against the fact that the government can fund itself indefinitely. Because if you look at any country that has gone through these inflations, there's a breaking point eventually when people are being taxed too much and they can't afford to live.
Completely separate rabbit hole.
Shinobi's 100% right, dude. Like after a certain point where people are not able to afford living, black markets do spring up because regardless of what the government thinks, people still need to eat, people still need a house, people still need to feed their kids. So yeah, there eventually is a breaking point eventually where the black market does take over.
So George, let me paint this in a way that you may be able to identify with, and it's not buying pot or going to your local dispensary. It's playing out in terms of like a transnational, for example. So leaving the United States and going to whether it's Colombia, Brazil, Panama, or anywhere.
How about Puerto Rico? Let's use that as an example.
Okay, Puerto Rico. Well, Puerto Rico's a special case because you're still kind of inside the United States, but
right, but it is a place that, as you know, Americans can pay zero tax.
Yeah, exactly.
It is a place.
There's some real limitations in Puerto Rico,
or hide from lawsuits.
But shut up, good guy. Let me finish. And so you're having these individuals that are looking at quote unquote the big government inside the United States, and they realize they're getting fleeced, for lack of better words, in terms of how much taxation they're paying. And slowly but surely, people are making the decision to upend their lives and leave to go basically create a better life for themselves. This is a story older than time itself. Right now, you're seeing it with wealthy individuals and expats that want to leave, that they have the money and the means to do this. Back in the Middle Ages, in the 1400s, you've seen people just leaving Europe and going to the United States. It's migration. It's migration because tyrannical governments. It's a story old as time. And at some point, you hit a stop where people say, you know what, I can actually make a life for myself somewhere else. And I'm not saying that the United States is remotely close to that point yet. Like, I still think the big government, quote unquote, era of the United States is probably still going to be around for another 70, 75 to 90 years. But as time goes on, and the wealth disparity grows and grows, or maybe not the wealth disparity, but your ability to actually have a fruitful life, whether you're paying 90% of your income that you're making directly on just living, you're not able to save anything, you can just look directly at home affordability, all these things, people actually get fed up and they create voting kind of, not voting schemes, but like a whole reason to vote people out, and that's how you have like revolutions. It's like that's one of the reasons why Trump got voted in, because people were just so sick and tired of everything. They knew Trump was a complete idiot, but they're like, at this point, anything's better than the status quo, because we need to shake things up, because they were feeling that they were being taken advantage of the government over the last 10, 20, 30 years, which they were, basically through endless money printing and inflation and basically a whole bunch of other quote unquote totalitarian things. And so they voted Trump in because they didn't give a fuck, because they just wanted to shake things up. And over the long run, that's going to continue to happen, whether it's people leaving the United States, or it doesn't even have to be the United States, it could be any country. And then also voting. Like, you can vote with your feet, and you can vote with your money, right? I think actual voting is probably the least of the three that you could actually do that make a difference today. But those are the three things that you can do. And people are going to, over time, gradually ask for something different, not only just in generations. Like, George, if whatever generation you're from, Generation X, you guys believe a certain thing. Millennials believe a different thing. Generation Z believe a different thing, and Gen Alpha is going to believe a completely different thing. And I think with over time, if you cut off the government's ability to just have endless amounts of money that's being monetized by the Federal Reserve, and allowing the Treasury to just endlessly go into further in debt, even if you're able to dollarize the planet and create enough demand for U.S. Treasuries worldwide, I believe that you hit a breaking point where there's faith in that system, and people are just going to want something different. Mind you, this is a really long play. Like, I'll probably be dead. We'll all probably be dead in this room by the time this plays out. But over time, that's just history repeating itself, in my opinion.
Okay, so what your base case is we move to a Bitcoin standard, and then the government comes out and becomes a little too greedy, says, yes, I know that we're using Bitcoin as money, but we're still going to go back to that system, or at least the levels of taxation that we had before, and the people are all for it because they want the welfare state.
Not.
So the revenue going to the government, federal government, still about 18%. And we still see roughly the same numbers that we have now, which produces big government. But then all of a sudden, people are going to say, wait a minute here. We've been getting fleeced for all of these years. Now we do have disinflation, or we have deflation, excuse me, because now we're on a Bitcoin standard. And of course, the economy is booming as a result. But because the people are being taxed at the exact same rate they're being taxed now, they're going to opt to move to another country. So that guy who's got the country club membership, that has his kid in private school, that has a wife that doesn't know anything about this stuff, nor does she care, is going to go to his wife and family and say, you know what, we're leaving our entire social network here in the United States to move to El Salvador. And because the taxes are the exact same today as they were 20 years ago.
My family did it, George.
No, that's not.
But enough people. That's fantastic, and I think that optionality is amazing. But my point is that there aren't going to be enough people under those conditions that I just pointed out that are going to exercise that option to move the needle.
No, and I'm not. That's not my base case. So I didn't say that at all. It's not my base case that the majority of people are going to leave. It's, you have, like I said, you have voting with voting. You have voting with your feet, and you have voting with your money. Selfishly, voting with your feet and your money are actually going to probably be able to move the needle for you personally more than voting. Voting over a long period of time will move the needle further. It just takes a lot longer in terms of the changing of the demographics, the changing of the culture, et cetera, et cetera. And it's
right.
not
But
that
remember, our main topic of conversation here is how Bitcoin standard is going to reduce the size of government spending down.
Yeah, so it's really
GDP.
Magoo, if I could just chime in for a second. You've all made great points about how Bitcoin promotes self-sovereignty, individual liberty, enhances the rights of individuals. But what I think is being missed in this discussion is how Bitcoin impacts international finance and international trade. And if you look at global economic agents, they're mostly driven by private sector entities. And I know you know this, George. You know this from the international banking system and the offshore dollar market and how banks work. And banks are just a fraction of it. You have to include non-banks. You have to include economic actors and those who promote trade. And what we've seen with the growth of the fiat system is that because of quote unquote money printer go burr and quote unquote fiscal spending run amok that is financed largely by deficits and taxation, you see people have sort of no check and balance on what the government can spend. Keep in mind, when the government spends money, who takes in that money? It's all private actors. It's companies, right? And if you curb the ability of the government to get access to capital by moving to a Bitcoin standard internationally, by nation states saying for geopolitical reasons, we have to be more frugal and spendthrift, and we can't run up these surpluses because we can't just print it and loan it away.
Deficits.
Yes, that is the key ingredient. It's a geopolitical issue, right? If Bitcoin, many Bitcoiners talk about how Bitcoin will become the reserve asset. Okay, look up what a reserve asset is. People protect their reserve assets and cannot spend it as easily. And economic agents, ex-governments, will demand Bitcoin for payment.
Okay, but if the society votes for 40% income tax, that outlining that scenario that you just described, how does that prevent the government receiving that 40% income tax the people voted for?
One, I think it would be a lot harder to do that because right
Is this-
now, it's actually when you go out on the campaign trail, politicians are not campaigning on increasing your taxes. They're doing the
They're
exact
not.
opposite.
I
No, they
don't
are.
know.
They're not.
Maybe you haven't listened to
No,
a lot of the
okay, but
people out there on the campaign trail.
if you want to look on the super far left and the Democrats about raising the wealth tax and all these different things in these kind of banana republics in California, maybe, but on a national level, that just does not jive. And on a national,
So Biden
And
didn't
that's
talk
not
about
even gonna
raising
happen
taxes
either.
at all.
Yeah, but George, come on.
Sure,
These are
it doesn't
straw man
matter.
arguments. This is
Jesus
a
Christ,
straw man
George.
argument. Biden campaigns on these things because there's visceral hatred by
Exactly.
most of the people on the left about how rich get richer and they can manipulate because
Right,
they
but
can't
his
a lot of
point
fact.
was that Biden doesn't no one campaigns on that except for these fringe
They
people.
campaign on
Nothing
it because
happens
of
here,
misdirection,
George.
because of
Nothing.
misdirected
Yes,
anger.
exactly.
That's why.
Yeah,
Because they're
it's
frustrated
just
the economic
people
system.
nobody
are frustrated because
actually
they don't
executes.
understand that they're getting richer.
Nobody
Yeah.
executes on that, George, because
Right.
they know it's political suicide if they do. And is what Joe is talking about. The only reasons why they're able to finance their deficits today is because there's dollar demand externally in the United States, where you have nation states, pension funds all over the world buying U.S. Treasuries. But if you change, like Joe said, if you change that reserve asset mindset, that's going to take a long time. The U.S. Treasury is not just going to go from being the world reserve asset to not overnight.
Again, now you're overcomplicating things by introducing deficits. Let's just get
What do you
hyper
mean
focused
how
on
does
We're
that
being
taxation.
realistic,
overcomplicate
George.
things?
George, we're
Because
being realistic here. You
because
can't just
if you
go
guys
from
want to
one
go
to the
down
other
that
like that.
path,
It's not.
if
It's
you
not
guys
gonna
want to go
happen.
down that path, that is a rabbit hole, which I'm happy to go down, but it's really going to confuse the debate. So I don't think that you guys have successfully addressed the fact that moving into the future, if society votes for a 40% income tax,
People leave the country.
Wait, hang on, George.
Okay, but okay, so
let's
let's
be
address that.
honest here.
People
When you
leave
say
the country.
40% income tax, you mean you think that every
Is that like
every
flat
part of
across the board?
it's going to be a flat tax of 40%.
Yeah.
You
What
think
is?
the population
Yeah,
would vote for
No,
that?
I'm
Dude,
just talking about the exact same
you're one of
That's
them,
why
dude.
you these.
You left the
the
country,
exact
and you
same
know people
tax
that
rate
have
we
left
have
to
right
Puerto
now.
Rico to avoid taxation. You know people that have done this, that have left to Puerto Rico to avoid taxes. How are you going to
Thank
argue
you.
that people aren't going to leave?
Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you for bringing that up. Let's go over this. So since 2013 or 14,
Wait, what?
Americans have had the option to go to Puerto Rico and basically pay zero tax or maybe a max 4%.
And they do.
But how many people have done that?
Wealthy, like every single fucking wealthy individual does. They make their money in
Hey,
America.
George,
So
how
what happened
many
to the tax base?
millionaires? How many millionaires existed in France before and after France's wealth tax?
But listen, what I'm saying is that tax
No,
structure doesn't change at all. The
crickets.
exact same. Can you hear me? Can you hear me or not?
Yeah, George, I can hear you, but at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if people are one. I don't agree with you how easily the federal level is going to just enact these taxations, and they're going to have people vote for these unless literally
I'm just saying
everybody.
the same tax structure we have right now that people are voting for. The exact same. Don't change anything.
Okay, so with that being said, do you think that the government? I go back and ask you the question that initially started. Do you think the government could finance itself without printing money with the current tax rate, or do they have to raise taxes? It's just simple math.
Fuck no, they gotta raise
Yes or no?
taxes.
Okay,
through
can
the
I
roof.
answer or
Are you
not?
kidding me?
Yeah,
I'll
go
answer
ahead.
for you,
Here's
George.
fuck no.
They will definitely have to raise taxes.
Okay, so in order for the government to fund itself right now at 50% spending of GDP, correct. They would definitely deficit spend. They'd need the sale of bonds. But in order for the government spending to be 30% of GDP, no, they would not have to issue bonds because they're collecting that right now as we speak in taxes at a federal, state, and local level.
Wait, cumulatively 30% at a federal, state, and local level, or
Correct.
so altogether?
Correct.
Yeah, but even with future spending, they already have $94 trillion of debt that they have to spend. So even if they don't spend any more new money in the future, they still have to increase taxes without a money printer. That's what it boils down to. They need to print money. There's no way around it.
There's like at least 5 states I know that their taxes are going down this year too.
Okay, but let's stay focused here. Let's just say there was no government spending, there was no Social Security, no off-balance sheet liabilities, none of that stuff. That the government stayed the size as it is today, indefinitely in the future, based exclusively on tax revenue that people voted for. If that were the case, I think that we can all agree on this live stream right now that we would define that as big government.
What do you mean by voted for? I don't remember the last time I voted for a tax increase specifically.
We voted as a society. We voted for people that created the tax structure we have right now.
Well, the tax structure that we have right now was actually put into place before I or you were even born, for the most part. But if you want to just say we've been voting for the status quo and no one's been willing to change it, we can talk about that.
Nobody knows. Nobody knows. Have you read the fucking tax code? Have you read the IRC code? Have you read anybody?
Nobody knows what the marginal rates are.
Come
on, guys. Come on. Of course, people know what the marginal rates are. They know what they're being taxed.
The reality, again, these arguments are disingenuous, George, because number one, that you actually have, go back to Mitt Romney's quote. 50% of the population doesn't pay income tax, right? They don't, just by virtue of how much money they make. So you're looking at raw numbers when they're paid disproportionately by a small number of people. And it's disingenuous to say people don't vote with their feet.
Help me understand.
Let me finish 1 second. I live in Illinois, right? We're facing mass exodus because of the taxes we have here. I literally have neighbors all the time moving to Texas and to more pro-economic states. So you can't keep making these. They're disingenuous arguments.
California.
Let's make sure you understand my argument. What about my argument is disingenuous?
Number one, I'll go down the list. Here's 5 things you said that are disingenuous. Number one, you're throwing out these numbers about overall taxation when they're paid disproportionately by the upper echelons of society. So to say that the population as a whole votes for these taxes is nonsense when they don't, because most people in America don't pay that anywhere near that rate of taxation. Number two,
they don't vote for the politicians who create the tax structure?
They vote because they don't have a direct effect on them. It's not affecting the lower classes because they're not paying taxes. They're getting refunds.
But that's fine in a Bitcoin standard.
Nor do they know
we
what
have the
they're voting
exact same
for,
tax
though, George.
structure. How does it
That's the
change?
point.
You still have 50% of the people not paying taxes.
Because under the Bitcoin standard, there's real repercussions because the government can't hand out Bitcoin to people like they do refunds and entitlements and other benefits. The cuck bucks are worth nothing.
But they're collecting Bitcoin in taxes.
Correct.
We're talking about a Bitcoin standard.
Yeah, right. But okay, so you're mixing and matching things. First of all, you wanted to know what I thought was disingenuous. I think it's disingenuous to say people don't vote with their feet. That argument is wrong because plenty of data shows it does.
People have voted with their feet in the past, which would lead me to believe that not enough people will vote with their feet in the future.
Have you looked up the Electoral College? Have you looked up where the House is going, where we're gaining seats and what states are losing seats? I'm
sorry, I apologize. Let me be more specific. Talk about leaving the country. I'm not talking about states.
What's the difference? You're going to more favorably economic states.
Because you're still under the same federal tax structure.
Yeah, but George, going on a Bitcoin standard or even going on a personal Bitcoin standard makes it easier for you to do this because Bitcoin is frictionless. You can just leave the country. The bank can't freeze your bank account, whatever. You just take the 12 words in your head, you just get on the plane and leave.
That's not my argument. My argument isn't that Bitcoin makes things a lot easier. That is, I think that's great, and that's why I think everyone should own Bitcoin, to have that optionality within their own life.
Well,
Yeah, but
this is what we're
that's the only repercussion the government has, though. That's the only repercussion the government has
My
over
point is
people leaving
not
the
enough
country.
people will exercise that option.
So I think, George, I think if you're talking about the 90s or even the early 2000s and 2010s, that may have been not a straw man argument. But seeing what's been happening over the last 3 years and just the interstate travel and people moving and going to better places or places they think is going to give them a better chance
But
to
why
have a
haven't more
prosperous...
Americans moved to Puerto Rico where they could pay zero tax?
Because they're poor. The rich people have all done it.
Yeah,
All the
because
rich
it's
people have moved
George,
to.
George,
What
it's not a
percentage of rich
notional...
people have moved to Puerto Rico?
George, it's not a percentage
Probably not
based.
much.
It's not a George, you know this. It's not, hey,
Wasn't Puerto Rico like destroyed a few years ago?
let me finish, go leader. So it's not about a percentages. Like, so if somebody is saying, hey, look, you can pay 4% in Puerto Rico, or you can pay, let's say, 20 or 30% in like California or whatever California's shitty rate is now. At the end of the day, the cost of moving to Puerto Rico and being able to afford a life in Puerto Rico, it doesn't match how much money they're saving. If you make 500,000 or $1 million a year, then yeah, it makes a lot of sense. And that's why you're seeing a disproportionate amount of people that are moving to Puerto Rico are high net worth individuals that take in a lot of money either through capital gains or in other means. And that's why they're doing it. It's the same reason why expats, people that leave the country completely, it's not people working at McDonald's, it's people that are making 6, 7, 8 figures a year that can do it, because not only can they actually do it and they have the capital to do it, but it's going to make an even bigger difference.
Okay, how will that dynamic change under a Bitcoin standard?
Well, I think Brian just said it changes the dynamics of the government's ability to keep you within its borders.
No, but you just talked about the poor people, middle class, not being able to move,
So-
and that's why the only people that have moved to Puerto Rico have been rich people, and that's why the percentage is so low. But how does that change under a Bitcoin standard?
So it changes under a Bitcoin standard because people are going to be able to, one, like Joe said, you're not going to be able to deficit spend until Kingdom Come and to buy votes, because that's what's happening right now, George. They're buying votes with inflation.
But you're changing the topic. How
No,
will the poor and
George,
middle
you're
class
changing the
be
topic.
able to? How will the poor and middle class be
It'll give
able
them
to
more. It'll give
afford
them. It'll
to
give them
leave the
more of a
United
chance
States under a
than now.
tyrannical government under a Bitcoin standard?
George,
How?
he's answering your question though. So the poor will not be able to leave the country though, but the government is not going to be able to spend away their problems, because the fact is that people are leaving the country because of taxation reasons, which lowers the amount of income that the government is taking in, and they're covering it up by printing more money. And under a Bitcoin standard, they can't do it, so they only have one choice: they have to cut government spending.
So is
But
Joe,
remember, the conversation is focused around the not deficits, but just exclusively the size of the government as a result of taxation.
Of deficits?
That's it.
No, the government is big because of deficit spending, George. It's not just taxation.
But listen, would you agree that government spending at 30% of GDP is big government? Yes or no?
I mean, it's an opinionated question to
Yes
begin
or no?
with.
What's your opinion?
I would say yes, sure.
Okay, they're getting that with taxation, without deficits.
But they're still not able to cover up the amount of liabilities they have with just that amount of money.
But
if you're telling me,
What is taxation?
This isn't a simple.
they need to be subsidized by the money
Like
printer.
this is what I don't. This is what I don't like about most of the macro people that are talking heads. They make things look and make it sound like it's so binary that there's no nuance. So like, if you want to actually, if you
I'm the
actually
guy.
want,
So you're blaming me of not getting into nuance?
if you
I
actually
told
want
you
to
this
talk
earlier. You can't look at.
Oh my fuck. Let me finish a sentence, you fucking autist. So at the end of the day, you're like, well, these people have voted for this 30% rate of national GDP in terms of taxation. The reason why that they've done that is because the politicians have been able to buy votes with basically inflation. So they're promising all of these bells and whistles of free things based off of the deficits, and they've been buying these people's votes. Once you get away from having that power dynamic of being able to buy votes I'm going to almost guarantee you that people are not going to be voting for more taxation. They're going to be voting for less taxation. When the government doesn't have the tools to bribe people, then it's going to be a problem. And as Joe said, most of the tax revenue is collected from a very small percentage of the actual population. It doesn't matter if the poor people vote or not vote. If the rich people decide to leave with their capital, that's the most important thing.
Okay, so your argument is if it weren't for deficit spending, then the tax receipts at the state, local, and federal level would not be 30% of GDP, because all of that deficit spending, or not all, but a good percentage of that deficit spending went to buy votes and buy the specific votes that led to the tax rates we have today.
Welcome to politics, because at the end of the day, the people that are voting, like, oh, I don't want to call them lemmings, but people that are on welfare, living paycheck to
They have
paycheck,
no idea.
they think that they've been fleeced, and they have been fleeced, not from rich people, but from the government, because the things that have actually deteriorated their purchasing power the most is not rich people, it's the government who's inflated their value and their dollar away. So they think they've been fleeced, and so they say, hey, you know what? I need some of my shit back. And so the government's like, hey, we'll give you free shit. You just got to vote for this candidate, and he'll give you this free things. And so they're duped into voting for that to increase the government's tax revenue, thinking that it's going to make their life better. But in reality, they get further and further away from having the purchasing power that they've had before because of taxation. So you can't just start the conversation at like the government's at 30% of GDP spending or of taxation, basically, because that has been gotten there from basically absolute horrible actors of using the deficit and using these coupons, these fake dollar coupons, to buy votes and to change, to manipulate things. It's the same way that the Federal Reserve manipulates the interest rates. At the end of the day, that manipulation has an effect, and they can change a lot of things by manipulating it. And the government and the Treasury, they do it by giving people free shit, or at least the promise of free shit.
Well, ultimately, Magoo, though, the problem I have mostly with the point you're trying to drive home, George, is that you have this view that because Bitcoin doesn't, in the short term, even though you acknowledge it, it's an freedom technology, it empowers individuals, it can awaken individuals to understand what money is and how their value should be amassed. Even though all those things are true, you have this notion that, well, because it instantly doesn't usher in utopia, that somehow there's something wrong with it. That that's
that is absolutely unequivocally not my view.
You said this several times. Well, how does it fix this? Well, it's not going to fix everything. We're not going to all be on unicorns after
I always
Bitcoin is
say
standard.
that Bitcoin, the one thing Bitcoin doesn't fix is people. And you can have a perfect money that's owned and operated by imperfect human beings, and you'll still have imperfection.
Bitcoin is money for enemies. That's the whole point. That's what.
Yeah, but George, no one's saying that. Like, this is what I mean. You're talking to the people that you're talking to in the Bitcoin community are these heads in the clouds or up their own asses when they're talking about how Bitcoin's going to save the planet and it's going to kill wealth inequality and all the corrupt politicians are going to go away instantly. That is not the case. Bitcoin, if it is what at least some of us in this room think it is multi-century playbook where it's going to take probably another 70 to 80 to 100 years to even become the reserve asset of the planet. And once it gets to that part, then it can start eating into the rod, into what we call society. And even at the very end, once it starts eating into that rot, there's still going to be rot because there's horrible humans and individuals. But the end goal is not to make a utopia, it's to make a better society than we have today. And to realize, like, this is the whole, and this isn't on you, George, this is on mostly politicians and a lot of people. They try to describe that whatever they're selling, whether it's a political, whether it's taxation or an idea or an ideology, they're printing it like that it's going to solve the world instantaneously. When in reality, very hard problems don't have simple solutions. It's going to be a very long, complicated, nuanced solution. So when you have these politicians getting on stage saying, "Hey, I'm going to solve world hunger. I'm going to solve wealth inequality. I'm going to solve homophobia. I'm going to solve whatever it is," or macro people giving you an idea saying, "Hey, if we did this, it would do this or that or this." At the end of the day, it's way more nuanced than that, and it's never that simple. And this is like, I think, George, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think just listening to you on how you think Bitcoiners or the Bitcoin community thinks about things is you've been listening to Bitcoiners that are people that have gotten in the recent past, and that think these things are going to go to like $10 million a coin. The US dollar is going to collapse tomorrow and it's going to solve all our world problems. Government's going to go away, because that's not the case. And anyone that I respect in the Bitcoin community doesn't think that. And they know this is going to be centuries long play of, like you keep saying, like the Bitcoinization of the world. And that can actually look and feel of many different ways. Like you're talking about everyone's using Bitcoin in a day-to-day currency and they're spending it, but in reality that's probably not what Bitcoinization really looks like.
But why am I doing that, Mr. Magoo?
I don't know why you're listening to those people.
No. Why am I trying to think through that stuff? Why do I even care?
Well, that's what I mean. If you actually did care, George, well, you probably do care. I'm not saying that you don't. Is that like
But let's pull on this thread here, because
so
I'm talking about things that I think you might agree that you might not have heard from other macro people, or you might not have heard of from other people in the space. I'm not really regurgitating the same old talking points that you've been hearing since 2011.
Tell me I'm
But
special.
why? Why am I doing that?
Well, this is well, why you're doing that. Like this goes back to the very beginning of our conversation about there's people out there that actually want to hear opposing views, different views, and they actually appreciate intellectual dialect and conversations to weed out people that know what they're talking about, people that don't know what they're talking about, or potentially both people know what they're talking about and they have difference of opinions on how certain things work. But at the end of the day, like at least when it comes to you, and forget your macro conversations, but they're talking about specifically about Bitcoin, is I think you've done a really poor job at talking to people that truly understand what Bitcoin is and what that process is actually going to look like. Because it's not this panacea. Like you keep mentioning this panacea, and like I've seen your videos on Bitcoin, and you keep mentioning like, and because you are right, there are people out there that are just their heads are so far up their own ass where they think Bitcoin's going to do these things. But you haven't actually talked to Bitcoiners, in my opinion, that actually have real opinions that make sense, right? Because
Do
like,
you think I seek out assholes to get their opinion?
well, I don't know where these people come from, George. Like when you talk to these people, I don't know if you're going to them or if they're coming to you, but like, hey,
No,
George,
but I
can I
think you
come
might
on
have
your
missed my
show?
point right there. If you weren't such an asshole online intentionally, but you've obviously got fantastic ideas, do you think I might have been more receptive to coming to you and therefore spreading your message to
Well,
other
I
people,
got
maybe
you
my
on here,
entire audience?
George. I got you on here, so I
But
think
I'm
the proof
saying,
is in the
but do you
pudding.
think you would have got my attention sooner if you didn't try to
Probably
carry
not. Like,
yourself?
no, probably not, because I'm not gonna like say that I'm super important or I have a huge audience or I'm super intellect. Like, like personally, I would rather have you talk to other people, but
How
I
many
personally
followers
don't.
do you have?
I don't know. Let me check. 20,000.
Okay. Just FYI, I started talking to Lynn Alden when she had 10,000 followers. And it was the best thing that I've ever done. It's one of the best conversations I ever had. So I just want to be very clear that I don't seek out people based on their profile or whatever like that, or how many subscribers they have. I seek out people who I find interesting. But it's very hard for me to find people interesting who are nonstop personally attacking, just verbally attacking people online and just doing nothing other than talk shit.
So what you're
And do
saying is
their
you
very
want to talk to
best to be an
Magoo, but it's
asshole
hard for
just to
you
score
to because
brownie
he's being an
points
asshole.
with their fraternity.
Saying Magoo had a shot, but he blew it.
Yeah, he's
No,
like,
but
Magoo, I really
I'm
want to
just
talk to you,
saying that
but
they're
you're an
just
ass. So
maybe in the future there might be a
Georgie.
cost benefit analysis and
So-
gain
so-
control.
He doesn't care,
And-
George.
Yeah, but
and
but
if
George,
your
let me
true
just tell you the flip
intention,
side.
What
if
are
your
the
George,
true
it's
incentives?
way more
intention is
fun
to educate.
All right, come on, guys, one at a time. I can't. My brain is hurting here. One at a time.
So, George, you care more about your feelings not being hurt than the facts. Is that correct?
No, what I'm saying is that if your true intention is to educate the normies about Bitcoin because you do think that that is a moral good, then maybe, just maybe, you should think about the toxicity that you omit online and say, maybe if I wasn't such an asshole, I'd be able to connect with more
Hey,
people
George, can I just
and bring
explain
them into the Bitcoin ecosystem.
Listen, George, just for a second here. Let's take it at face value that, and I believe you honestly that you're trying to figure this out. You want to talk to people and get a different perspective that's reason based and rational. Okay. The flip side of it is if you've been around in Bitcoin for any number of period, we see so many grifters walk through this space and make ridiculous arguments, make disingenuous arguments. They use Bitcoin to engagement farm. I mean, look at Peter Schiff. He's built a career. No one would know who he is outside the gold community if he didn't attack Bitcoin relentlessly. And when we see macro guys that come in and try to make these similar arguments, it's difficult sometimes to ascertain whether it is based in good faith or whether it's just another example of someone grifting off of Bitcoin and trying to raise their profile.
First of all, I don't know anyone that has brought up the arguments that I have discussed here tonight. Now, maybe there are, but I don't know of them. Number
Jeez,
two,
you need to talk to more
people that do it
George.
all the time.
Yeah,
all the time.
Jesus
there's
Christ.
been people that have argued on how this exact thing that I'm talking about with taxation, how that sound money in and of itself might not lead to small government because people voting for more taxation. Who has articulated that in the past?
Why are they? So here's my question: why would they be?
No,
voting for more
who has
taxation?
articulated that in the past?
George, who gives a fuck? That's not the point. Who would be? Who would be voting for that? That's the point. That's a real point.
Maybe you just didn't hear the prior person.
Okay, go ahead.
Maybe you didn't hear that prior
George,
person. Now,
like
number
to kind
two
of
is I get what you're saying, but I've done 3,000 videos. I've got maybe hundreds, thousands of podcast episodes. I've been on Twitter going back and forth trying to communicate these messages. I used to have a podcast where I'm talking to all these people, trying to interview, trying to get ideas, trying to find truth. So if there's anyone out there,
we're giving it to you, George.
You would know what their intentions
to you
are.
right now.
I think because I put myself out there to such a degree.
You're doing it right now,
I use
George.
my face. I use videos. I use all of these things. I think you might have an understanding as to where I'm coming from, and the fact, hopefully, that I'm trying to find the truth, and I'm not engagement farming.
So George, let me one, like Joe is right. Like this community, if I can even call it a fucking community, because that's cringy. Bitcoiners, especially of people that have been in this space for a long time, like a very long time. Joe is right. We've seen endless amounts of people coming in and engagement farming, for lack of a better words, whether it's monetized or not monetized, and just attacking Bitcoin. Peer shift could be maybe the perfect example of this, and then people get tired of this. And if you want to look at people who you say have talked about or thought about the first point that you made, every single Bitcoiner, in my opinion, because as you're going down the Bitcoin road of education and you think about these things, those things that you're talking about, will Bitcoin, or not even Bitcoin, let's say sound money, will sound money make government smaller? Those are all thoughts that we've all had in our heads, and we've endlessly debated them, not only internally with ourselves, but with each other for the last 12 or 13 years. And it's like, so maybe it's a little bit of stink on our side for just like putting our nose up to it, because we've actually put that idea in that conversation in our head, George. Honestly, like even myself personally, I've thought about that deeply for the last 11, 12 years about, will Bitcoin actually do what I think it's going to do, and how does that play out, and what can I do to help that play out? Like, and so that's where I'm coming from.
So because you guys as a collective group have really discovered the truth, and you've explored literally every single question that there is to explore.
No, it's not. No, that's disingenuous,
this means
George.
that you have no blind spot whatsoever.
No,
so
George,
anyone that
that's not
tries
it.
to inquire, you're going to take it upon yourself to be a toxic asshole because, well, you're justified because you've
No,
just been
no.
doing this for a long time.
No,
You're
that's
OG,
wrong. No, it's
and
wrong.
you're
It's
just
because hang on,
giving
Magoo,
off
hang
what
on.
you've received.
No, it's because we're starting from a reference point of truth. That's why. From first principles reference point. That's why. And then we're going from there. And there's certain situations that we have thought of, but that's it. It's not because of what you just said. That's
Yeah,
not
and
correct.
so I think
George, feel free to contribute, man. Like, come in and talk and throw your ideas. Do you feel like we're missing something? Like that's how we arrive to these conclusions. Is go for it.
My friend, I have tried to do that at an exhaustive level, and you should see my Twitter feed as a result.
so
From the Bitcoin community.
So one thing, George. I think it's a little bit disingenuous to say that like we don't want to take on any ideas or we think that we're perfect. We're definitely not. Like we have these tangential discussions amongst ourselves and even new people that bring these new ideas. It's just like I don't want to sound like arrogant or cocky, like that we're incredibly smart. It's just that we've had like those, especially the point that you brought up with the taxation and small government. Those are conversations that we've had. Like I can't even tell you how many times we've had conversations talking about that. So like just on a personal level, that's not an interesting topic for me. And it's not that I know everything or that I think what I know is always going to happen, because at the end of the day, economics is pseudoscience at the best of days. It's just that we've had this conversation so many times it just doesn't interest me. And so and this is not a knock on you here at all, George, but like you being interested in Bitcoin or being interested in Bitcoin as it relates to macro, the way that I see it and looking at it, if you're being genuine here, and I'm not saying you are or you aren't, it is what we would call like a noob, like being introduced to Bitcoin and having these internal thoughts with yourself or your guest about what Bitcoin is. And a lot of these Bitcoiners that have been in this space having these conversations for years, we see that and be like, okay, this is where George is at, was his thinking about Bitcoin. And everyone's, as you spend more time with anything, it becomes more evolved, and you become to understand it differently over time. And we see, okay, this is where George is with Bitcoin here, and we can see a little bit of not improvement or evolution in thought on Bitcoin itself, but that is also sliced in with like, yes, we have seen grifters, because you described the grifter or one of the grifter playbooks that we've seen in Bitcoin so many times, where people will come in and just yell Bitcoin, 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 and then they monetize and then they go off and they end up just being these massive grifters trying to sell a product, and they don't really actually care. They're either selling like index funds or whatever the fuck it is that we've seen that. So those two things combined really kind of inflate, or not inflate, but really kind of describe, I guess, the current situation with you, George. And like, to be honest with you, maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know when it comes to like trolling or whatever you would call it. Like Joe on stage here, Joe Carceri. My relationship with Joe started with me endlessly trolling Joe until the end of the world. And now me and Joe talk all the time. And it's not that like I'm personally attacking you, Joe, like George, you're a scammer, you're doing this, you're doing this.
But
That
that's
is
exactly
how.
what you're doing.
No, it's not
George,
though,
George, do
George.
you know what tough love is, George? Do you know what
No,
tough love
it's
is?
not. This
But
to
this is
George. Maybe this is a generational thing. Then it may be. I don't know, because when people talk different ways, like so when I say that on there, you might take that. Obviously, I can see how you take that personally. You're like, oh, this motherfucking cartoon character is calling me the worst macro analyst on the planet. But realistically, that is a form of communication. It's not like if I
No, but
really
what it
wanted.
is it's cowardice, and I'll tell you why. Because you're avoiding engaging in an
Well, you're on
actual
stage, George. You're on
conversation
George, we're
with
always
stage.
facts
engaging.
and
We're
data,
George,
engaging with you
we're
right now.
and
engaging
you're
24/7.
circumnavigating that
George,
and
No,
hiding behind a
no.
cartoon character.
We're engaging 24/7, and you're just
Happens
throwing
as
out a
being a
bunch of
complete
shit right now.
George,
asshole
George.
George,
If
that
you're
I
does
shitting out of
didn't,
your
nothing for
mouth.
anybody.
You're shitting out of your mouth. Please stop.
if I didn't want to engage with you and I just wanted to troll you, like why would I ever? Why would I have you up? One, that's another thing.
Because
Like I don't.
hopefully you have a sense of pride. And I called you out, and you completely
Jesus,
bailed on the first
called
one.
you out,
So then you
man.
set
Yeah.
this one up,
So this is
right? What are
definitely
you going to do?
this.
George,
You're going to
George,
hide it
Magoo,
He
I would just
told you
like
with
he
your
was
tail between your
working.
legs?
So this
He
is
literally
so this is
told you he was.
George, I would just like to propose to you guys. We are going to be having a fight club at Bitcoin 2023.
yeah. So maybe this is another generational thing, George, where you think that like if you call someone out, that like people actually give a shit like about that. Like you think like this is what it
George,
means.
you're
Like,
on the internet. You're on the internet. What are we talking about here?
Yeah,
If
but
you
on the
didn't give
Xbox
a
Live
shit, then
room.
why did you
Jesus
do this
Christ.
spaces?
I did this basis because I was busy before, and I literally said, "Hey, I'm busy. Can we do Saturday?" And then you started your space anyhow, which was fine. You can do that.
What did you name this space? Just out of curiosity.
It's Curious George.
And
He's curious. You just
I
said
think
curiosity.
I think the other title. So I'm not the only one that can change it. The other co-host. But I think the original title was Magoo's whiteboard thesis on how to drop your balls. I
No,
believe.
I think it was
okay,
breaking news. Magoo's balls dropped.
That could have been one of
it
them
was the
too.
whiteboard. So if you have no desire whatsoever to engage with me because you're just above that, because it's a generational thing,
You're here,
then
George.
why
We're
on earth
What have
did
we
you
talking.
name
been
the
doing?
space as
What
that?
have we been
Bro,
doing?
you're engaging right now.
We're talking,
You-
George. Like, and George,
This
just
is
because
funny.
I find George, like, honestly, this is what this is. And I honestly think it's a generational thing. Like, I'm not trying to be like disingenuous here, but I think there is a generational gap in communication because, like, just because I find your way of communicating on a YouTube video with a whiteboard like very boomer-esque funny, like I find that funny, my audience will find that funny. That's not detracting to say that there's not value on your whiteboard. It's that I find it funny that someone is still using a whiteboard. Like it's a generational thing, and I'm not saying like that's what's funny to me. It's not what's on your whiteboard, George. It's the fact that you're using a whiteboard, and it's not to say that you can't do
Dude,
something good on the.
you're absolutely talking. I mean, all due respect, man, but you're just talking out of your ass. If I could show you my back end analytics for YouTube, I think you would be very, very
What the fuck,
surprised.
dude?
Wait, what the fuck does a George? You're missing the point again. I'm not saying that you're not technically savvy. Like that's not what I'm saying. I'm not saying you're some boomer who doesn't know how to use technology. I'm just saying the fact
George,
that you use a whiteboard. That's ironically funny to me. Like that's I think it's funny,
you're hurting
and
yourself
that's
here,
not
George.
me saying that you are a boomer that doesn't know how to use. Like obviously you know how to use technology. You're on YouTube. You're on Spaces. It's just funny that you're disseminating your information via a whiteboard, and I find
But
that funny.
but what I'm saying is if you look at the demographics on my whiteboard videos, you'll see that the millennials, the Gen Z, they are a significant percentage of those whiteboard views. That's
Well,
all I'm saying.
well, no, I'm not. No, and I'm not saying that they wouldn't be because if you want to take it one step further, obviously, because
It's like the idiots voting in for the stupid
Gen
tax law.
Z,
Yeah.
and millennials are the only ones on the internet. Like, I don't think boomers are just scrolling through YouTube. So that's just normal. But I'm not saying that millennials don't find value in you using a whiteboard. The fact that one cartoon character finds it funny that you use a whiteboard, like that shouldn't bother you, George.
Here's the point. Who gives a fuck about that little cartoon character? Who cares?
Hey,
Like,
can you let him
move on.
soy?
You know what my mama used to tell me? She used to say, "Worry about
Yeah,
yourself."
I think,
Okay,
guys, as you
and
can
that's
tell,
it.
I'm losing my voice here. I
Okay, that's a good
apologize. But I
excuse.
think
Thank you for your
my
time.
main thing here that I would strongly encourage you guys take it for what it's worth, right? I think that you guys might have a significant blind spot because of exactly what Mr. Magoo was saying before, that he believes that he and his crew have explored pretty much every single idea there is to explore, and they have come to the correct
Oh my
conclusion.
god,
And
George, you sound
George,
like a
Passive
man,
aggressive,
politician,
George.
George.
George,
You
no
sound like a
one,
politician. You
George,
really
You
do.
weren't
I'm not being
listening.
clearly,
passive aggressive.
This is
I'm
bad.
talking. I'm just
Yeah, you're
No,
being
a
passive
listen, guys.
aggressive
politician.
like a
If
woman.
No,
yeah, George,
politician.
come on, man. Like,
Politician.
I thought we were gonna have a real, like, no one said that. Like,
Yeah, nobody
if
did. You
I
said that,
honestly
George.
you
thought,
You
said
did.
that, Mr.
no,
Magoo,
no,
when
I didn't say that. I said we've literally talked about so many different things. If I thought all the conversations were exhausted, I wouldn't be on Twitter or I wouldn't even be on this room discussing things. All I said specifically is a lot of the ideas and the thought processes that you're talking about as it relates to Bitcoin, we have actually went through a lot. I'm not saying we haven't went through it to the perfect extent because there's no endless way that you could do that, but I'm just saying those ideas and these thoughts that you're coming up with are tiring to a lot of Bitcoiners who've actually thought about that a lot. It's not that we're completely like God mode and every single idea that comes up, we don't
Well,
want to
let's
touch
hang
it.
on, Magoo. Let's not forget.
Hey,
George
can you
had
let
said
soy?
earlier that you made a very simple conclusion about inflation earlier. So I mean, what are we talking about here? Like, come on, you know what I mean? Like,
and Yes,
But
and
what
from my vantage point, and this is just me being honest, there are several topics that you guys do not understand when it comes to just basic stuff.
Thanks, Dad.
And you guys and listen, if
Can
you
you
can call
name some
me,
of those things, George? Name some.
oh, just the simple basics
Like?
of the monetary system.
Like
George,
one.
you were
Well, when you say that
bad.
the Fed is
You
money
couldn't-
printing, when you say
No.
I don't think that you guys really
George, that's a
quite.
euphemism. We all know that bank reserves aren't money printing. If we want to have a conversation
Okay,
about
then let's
debt-based
go into that,
monetary
Mr.
system,
Magoo. This is a good conversation. What exactly impacts M2 money supply?
it's basically commercial banking, lending and borrowing.
And
In what? In terms of like growing of them, like the euro dollars? Like, are you talking about outside the United
see,
States or
this
inside
is
the United States?
no offense. I apologize for putting you on the spot there, but this is what I'm talking about, guys. Maybe
Don't
just maybe.
What?
So wait,
George,
answer the
what are
question
you
then,
talking about? George,
You
what?
asked the question. Answer it then. What impacts M2 money supply in your opinion?
What would impact? Well, I just did a whiteboard video on it, so we can
Go
go
watch
over
it,
that.
guys. Go watch it.
Oh my god.
Okay, guys. Do you want me to answer the question or not?
Yeah, George, answer it.
Okay. So one of the things that impacts M2 money supply is the fact, obviously, M1 is a component of that.
Interest
So
rates,
as you guys,
George, we
as you
know.
guys,
Come on, Jesus, federal funds rate, right?
Let him talk about the whiteboard.
not the federal. See, you guys, the peanut gallery. You guys, it's just blatantly obvious that you don't understand this. So could I explain, or
Yeah,
you guys want me
explain to us where we're wrong.
Please.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm saying you just guys probably haven't thought it through. So M1 is a component of M2. So the reason why M1 and M2 have gone down, if you look into the data, is because the savings account levels from April 22 to December of 22 went down by 1.2 trillion. So where did it go? All right. Well, one place it went to was those entities in the real economy buying T-bills. So then what happens is those T-bills, that takes reserves from the banking system, that goes down into the TGA. The TGA takes those reserves and pays off the Federal Reserve. So those bank reserves go to money heaven, but then so does that M1 and in effect M2 money supply. And it's the same thing if they take those currency units and put them in a money market fund, and that money market fund takes those and invests them, quote unquote, in the Fed's reverse repo. That's also going to impact M1 to a significant degree. So you see, there might be
question,
some
George? What
things
was your
there,
initial
guys,
question?
that
What
are
was- what was your
relevant
initial- shut up.
to
What was
inflation,
your-
relevant
what
to
was
the
your
monetary
initial
system,
question, George?
therefore
Everyone, shut up one at a time, please. Fuck.
Yeah, that means me. What was your initial question?
He didn't have a question. He made a
That's what I
sweeping
mean.
statement, which is there's a bunch of basic shit
why
that
I'm,
we don't understand.
That's why I'm
And then he
confused.
no,
So he says,
that's the sweeping statement that you guys have made.
what's the
No,
sweeping
you
statement?
literally just said that.
This is my confusion. Like, you're like, hey, what affects the M2 money supply and then the M1 money supply, and then you go into it and we're like, okay, what's the point? Like, we know, like do we know what the M2 and the M1 do actually to the economy when it's sucking out liquidity or there's excess savings or whatnot? Like what does that have to do with anything with what we're talking about, George? Like, I'm just confused. Like, this is a weird, like, why did you act like? Why are we talking about this?
Well, number one, you asked me to.
Well, that was after you asked it first.
Oh, yeah, you asked us to.
Because I was giving you an example of something that pertains to inflation, deflation, disinflation, the monetary system, how it operates with the Federal Reserve, with the banking system, with the politics of the Eurodollar market, that might be a slight
but you
blind
were
spot
asked
for you
for an
guys,
example of
proving the
something that
fact
we don't
that there
understand.
may be blind spots that you guys might not know about, and you guys have a level of arrogance
You just
that
said
may
like
be preventing
everything.
you.
So this goes back to George once again. I think you've been talking to Bitcoiners who truly actually believe the expression "money printer go burr" from the Fed. That, like, this is what this is the only thing I can take from it, because anyone that actually knows how the current debt-based monetary system works, they understand that. They might not know the exact plumbings of how M2 grows or shrinks, or how M1 shrinks, or how the Treasury actually funds itself, or what the reverse repo is, or the repo markets, and all these great Keynesian plumbing economic things that happen. which some people in the Bitcoin community do, some of them don't.
But you can't understand money if you don't understand those things. At
No,
least you
but
can't understand the dollar.
So this is the disagreement I have, and so like that's money. That's not money. That's the U.S. dollar.
Currency units. You know what I'm talking about.
Well, this is George. This is like, and I'm willing to give you that. So like, this is what I'm saying. Like, so when I say that, and I in a vernacular, and I correct you, and I know that you know what you're talking about, and so it's fine. But then when someone says, "Oh, money printer," you're like, "Oh, Magoo doesn't know what he's talking about because he said the Fed prints money." It's like
no. I gave you a specific example. Forget the money printer. I gave you the example of M1, M2. You might not have known that.
The question
so I think
was
that's a
only
pretty
on
good
M2.
example of maybe a blind spot, and maybe you guys don't know some things that are really important.
Yeah,
To
well,
the
I'll tell
Bitcoin
you,
discussion, for heaven's
how
sake.
does
I'll just tell you, we did know that. How
maybe
about
that may be
Just
true
end
or
this stupid
that may be
point
true
right
or
now.
not true that some Bitcoiners don't actually understand how the current monetary system.
But you don't understand that.
I don't. I don't understand that.
You don't speak for me, George.
How exactly did you prove that in the last 10 minutes?
I asked him I asked him how this works, and he said, "I don't know. You tell me."
No, that's not
George,
what he
when you
said.
ask a question, you should be specific, and if you want like an explained answer, like thought out, or if you want just a high level, just quick summarized answer.
All right, guys, listen.
You keep jumping back and forth,
I
buddy.
appreciate you guys. As you
No,
can tell,
I'm not
I'm
trying to
completely
argue
losing
with
my
you. I'm
voice
just
here.
being realistic. You just said that 20 minutes ago. I know.
Listen, it's almost midnight my time. Obviously, I'm losing my voice. I've done a lot
try,
of talking
honey.
today. So I appreciate you, Magoo, having me on. I appreciate you guys listening. Looks like, we got a lot of people. Hopefully, for some people listening, I was able to offer a little bit of value.
You weren't.
I completely disagree with the fact that I only regurgitate other people's information. I think anybody that's watched a lot of my whiteboard would understand and be the first person to say that many and most of my ideas are original. Although, to your point,
They're not.
Absolutely, I stand on the shoulders of giants, as we all do, Mr. Magoo. I think you'd be the first person to admit that you've learned a lot of things from other people that have helped build your framework.
He's so short. Look at him. He's got
and
it.
I definitely fall into that category. But you guys have let me speak my piece. I appreciate it. And like I said in the earlier live stream or Twitter Spaces, excuse me, that I have never blocked anybody out of sheer principle, because I think that's the right thing to do, other than just spam bots, which I'm sure you guys all get. And I will continue to do that, try my best to take the high road and engage people. And what I think is, constructive debate to get more people involved in thinking about not just Bitcoin, but really the principles of freedom and liberty and free market capitalism. Because at the end of the day, that's what I'm most passionate about.
You got to lower their taxes for a bit more time.
So I guess
anyway, guys, that's all I can say on my voice is done.
Yeah, thanks for coming up, George. Well taken. I'll leave you with, I guess, two parting maybe thoughts. One, when it comes to interacting on the internet, like especially when it comes to trolls, because like this is where like I think you honestly you take it personally, and it's not. We can debate that, but it doesn't matter. Especially like if your audience truly is millennials and Gen Zers, through your metrics, the best way to combat trolls, and this is anyone that's actually grown up on the internet and on video game lobbies, is you don't take offense to things, George. You actually troll them back. Like, because this is the thing: when trolls smell blood in the water, that's when it's game over for you. And like, so this is actual general advice. Like, this is genuine advice for you. Is one, don't take things personally, and two, if you're actually feeling up to it, do your own trolling to those individuals as well, because then people, it's like when sharks smell blood in the water, and if you're in there playing that game, I'll call it a troll game for lack of better words, people will actually respect you more, George. Like, I know that might eat into some professional imagery or whatever, taking the high road. But when you engage,
that's my personal principles. That has nothing to do with my image. And I appreciate your advice, but I want everyone to know that I've been dealing with, as you guys, I'm sure all do, with an epic amount of toxicity for years now on Twitter. And this is really
So have all of us.
I appreciate that. So you guys
You
can
have
I
follow
hope your
my
larynx gets
standpoint
better,
here,
George.
and hopefully you guys appreciate the fact that I deal with this toxicity nonstop, and I very rarely, if ever, lose my temper. Today would obviously be an exception, but I typically take the high road and I don't block anybody, and I do that out of principle, and I'll continue to do that moving forward. And as far as engaging and actually trolling other people, I appreciate the advice. Unfortunately, I just don't have time.
Thank you for not blocking us, George.
All right, everybody, I'm just going to make a public service announcement. The scientist known as 4chan has finally distilled a winning response to "You mad, bro?" Yeah, but in 5 minutes, I won't be mad anymore, and you'll still be retarded.
Fuck, he left. I wanted to leave him with "Have fun staying poor."
Yeah.
Yeah.